Jesus Christ. Amen. In the words of Brother George Martin, you may enjoy the comfort of your seats. So, Brother Israel tells me the fire marshal required us to reduce the number of chairs in here, so that's why you see fewer chairs set up. I don't think it's because I was preaching fire brimstone or anything. In fact, I don't think I was preaching at all. But fire marshal's the fire marshal. He gets to say what he wants to say. I'm going to back up here this week for just a little bit. I mentioned that Brother Mike May sent me a video here a couple weeks ago that directly relates to some of the stuff we had talked about earlier, and I wanted to share that with you. And a couple of thoughts, because in fact it does sort of point us towards this place I wanted to go anyway, about current events, trying to kind of wrap all this stuff into what we're seeing today. But you might remember we talked about this fellow, Ron Wyatt, and a number of the things that he found or was attributed to him for finding, one of which was the Red Sea crossing, and how he was ridiculed and all that kind of stuff. Well, that's kind of what this video is about. But just as a refresher, if you remember, he claimed to have dove here off of the coast of the Sinai Peninsula, which is Egypt today. It was controlled by Israel at the time, off of Nuweiba Beach. And he claims to have found a golden chariot wheel. So, and Scriptures tells us that in the morning watch, the Lord looked into the host of the Egyptians through the pillar of fire and the cloud, and troubled the host of the Egyptians, and took off their chariot wheels, that they drove them heavily. This is when they pursued the Israelites across the Red Sea when the Lord parted the waters, right? Very, very controversial. This is Ron Wyatt talking. He says, like Noah's Ark, these were not in perfect condition and required careful examination to see exactly what they were. They were covered in coral, which made it difficult to see them clearly, but it appears that the coral was the agent the Lord used to preserve them. They found numerous wheels. Some were on their axles and some were off. So we know the Scriptures tells us that as they were pursuing the Israelites, the Lord troubled them and took the wheels off and yada yada, right? This is one of the pictures that he had taken of one of his compatriots down there when they were diving. Found a formation that looked like the remains of an actual chariot cabin, right? So he was pretending to drive his chariot down there, right? If you remember this particular discussion, I showed you this slide just to talk about the fact that I have a little bit of background in diving and Navy diving. I went to the Navy to be a diver, and I was passionate about deep sea diving for several years. So I got a little bit of familiarity with the kind of equipment that's available to do this stuff. And I raised the question back then. I said, if we're wondering about whether the chariot wheels are on the ocean floor down there, it's deep. It's like 900 feet deep. And typically a free diver doesn't dive below about 120 unless you've got special equipment to support that kind of a thing. I just said, why don't we send some of this equipment down there and look? We got it. It's available today. Well, it turns out that has happened. And Brother Mike brought it to my attention. And it happened in 2024, right? So it's very, very recent. And it's more recent than Mr. Mahoney's film. So I wanted to share it with you. Turns out Brother Michael Gonzalez had also sent me a video on this, very similar. But this particular one I'm going to share with you today actually uses some of Mahoney's footage, right? And it shows some of the people that he had interviewed as well. Not all of them have speaking parts, but just as a reminder, you'll see these folks. Top left there is Mahoney on the left. The center guy is Dr. Leonard Muller, who's a Swedish DNA research scientist by trade, also a master diver. So he was one of them that was on this dive team. They went down to look at these parts. At the bottom is Dr. Glenn Fritz, you'll see in this film as well, who was the biblical geologist that talked about the contours at the bottom of the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aqaba there, because people were saying, it's 900 feet deep, and yeah, but it's 11 miles wide. So if you kind of calculate all that stuff, the slope there is not impassable by humans, right? And that's what he was talking about in the Mahoney film. Top right is Dr. James Hoffmeyer, archaeologist and Egyptologist, an academic. And sometimes he kind of was agreeing with Mahoney and sometimes he wasn't, but he was in Mahoney's films and he leads off. So I'm going to show you this film right quick. It's about 30 minutes long, but I'll pick up on some of the points that they made after we're done here. I want to make sure we have time to do this. So Brother Roger, we ready for this? We need audio.
More skeleton than human remains, perfectly preserved in coral. Is there any physical evidence on seabed? Yes, there is. And we have some examples. Skeleton for humans, skeleton part of horse and wolf, chariot wheels. This finding doesn't support an ancient story, it threatens to rewrite it. And get this, Egyptologists are completely silent. The implications of this find are staggering, and the story behind it is even crazier. The $10 million thief. So here's the deal. In late 2024, a small, highly secretive team of divers, engineers, and underwater archaeologists launched a private expedition. This wasn't a university-funded project you read about in a boring journal. This was a quiet, covert operation funded by private backers to the tune of over $10 million. They were equipped with technology that most archaeological teams can only dream of. Advanced side-scan sonar, military-grade remotely operated vehicles, ROVs, with high-definition 4K cameras and hypersensitive magnetometers. They weren't just looking for old pots or a stray anchor, they were looking for something specific. Something that mainstream science insisted did not exist. They were looking for the lost army of the Pharaoh. For decades, rumors and amateur reports had pointed to a very specific spot in the Red Sea Gulf of Aqaba. The stories, often dismissed as fantasy, told of coral-encrusted chariot wheels, scattered bones, and the physical remnants of the Egyptian army from the biblical Exodus. For just as long, mainstream Egyptology and archaeology had laughed off these claims. They called it pseudoscience, a religious hoax, and wishful thinking. But this new team had a map. It was a map based on those old ridiculed claims, and they had the technology to see what no one else could, or perhaps what no one else, like wheels, hundreds of them. They deployed the ROV, a small submarine robot, sending it down into the dark, cold water, hundreds of feet below the surface. The sub's high-powered lights cut through the gloom. At first, there was nothing but sand and rock, and then suddenly there it was, emerging from the sand, a perfectly round shape, completely covered in coral. It was, without a doubt, a wheel, an ancient spoked chariot wheel. As the ROV glided forward, its robotic arm brushing away the silt, another came into view, and another, and another. It was a debris field, a massive one. The site stretched for nearly a mile and a half. This was it. The team knew they had to go down themselves. This was too big to just observe through a camera. Elite deep sea divers, many of them ex-military, prepared for a difficult and dangerous dive. As they descended into the silent deep, the sheer scale of the cataclysm became terrifyingly clear. This was not a single shipwreck. This was a military catastrophe, frozen in time. The seafloor was a war zone. It was littered with the remains of a fleeing or perhaps charging army. They saw wheels with 4 spokes, 6 spokes, and even 8 spokes. This detail is a massive wow factor. Why? Because these specific designs match perfectly the different types of chariots used by the Egyptian army during the New Kingdom period. The 4-spoked wheels were older, but the 6 and 8-spoked wheels were the new high-tech stable designs used by elite warriors and the pharaoh himself. Finding them all jumbled together was a snapshot of the entire Egyptian chariot corps. But it wasn't just wheels. They found twisted metal fragments that looked like axles. They found what appeared to be the tangled rectangular remains of the chariot cabs themselves. Now just piles of corroded bronze and petrified wood, all fused to the seafloor by centuries of relentless coral growth. What most people don't realize is that the divers reported an overwhelming, eerie feeling of dread. They were swimming through an underwater graveyard, and then they found the bones. Tangled within the chariot debris, just as the old reports had claimed, were bone shards. Hundreds, possibly thousands of them. Some were clearly animal, the skulls, ribs, and femurs of horses exactly where they would be if they were still harnessed to the chariot. But others were unmistakably human. Spines, pelvic bones, and fragments of skulls all mixed together in a chaotic, terrible jumble. This wasn't just an equipment dump. This was the final watery resting place of hundreds, maybe thousands, of elite soldiers and their animals who all perished in a single, sudden, and violent event. The crazy part? One of the divers sweeping a high-powered light over a mound of coral caught a faint, unnatural glimmer. Beneath the crust, something was shining, a dull, unmistakable golden sheen. This matched the most incredible, most dismissed claim of all, that among the Army's wreckage was a single gold-plated chariot wheel, perhaps belonging to a high-ranking general or even the pharaoh. They couldn't touch it. But coral had locked it in place. To try and remove it would be to destroy it. The team documented everything. They took thousands of high-resolution photos and hours of high-definition video. They knew what they had found would send shockwaves through the world. They had found physical, tangible evidence that seemed to support one of the oldest and most foundational stories in human history. But here's the catch. This discovery, as monumental as it was, also opened up a massive can of worms. It challenged everything mainstream Egyptology had taught for the last 100 years. And that is why, when the initial findings were quietly shared with certain academics and institutions, the reaction was not excitement. It was silence. A cold, hard, frozen silence. But the discovery was just the first piece. The location was the second. A bridge at the bottom of the sea. So why this exact spot? What's so special about this random patch of the Gulf of Aqaba? Yeah, about that. This is where the story gets even more incredible. The location of the dive was not random. It was chosen because it's one of the most unique and bizarre underwater features on the entire planet. The Gulf of Aqaba, which separates the Sinai Peninsula from modern-day Saudi Arabia, is known for being extremely deep. We're talking about a massive underwater canyon that in most places plunges down to 5,000 or even 6,000 feet. That's over a mile straight down. It is a massive, impassable trench. Trying to cross it with an army of chariots or even on foot would be completely impossible. It is a sheer cliff of dark water, except for one very specific place. Right where the divers found the Army, there is a massive flat land bridge that spans the entire Gulf. It's an underwater plateau stretching nearly 10 miles from the shore of a massive beach in Egypt called Nueva to the shore of Saudi Arabia. And get this, on either side of this bridge, the seabed plunges dramatically into those 5,000 foot deep abysses. But the bridge itself is relatively shallow. Now, shallow is a relative term. It's still about 900 feet deep at its deepest point, but compared to the mile-deep canyons on either side, it is a raised pathway. The sonar maps show it clearly, a distinct, massive underwater road, 10 miles long and several miles wide. This underwater pathway is the only place in the entire 100-mile length of the Gulf of Aqaba that an ancient group of people could have even attempted to cross. What most people don't realize is that this geographical feature is a perfect one-to-one match for the ancient story. The biblical account describes the fleeing Israelites being trapped against the sea with mountains on either side and the Pharaoh's army closing in. The location at Nueva Beach is a perfect fit. It's a massive, sprawling beach, but it's completely walled in on either side by steep, impassable mountains. The only way in is from the west, and the only way out is forward into the sea, and right there at that exact spot is the underwater bridge. This geography is a massive wow factor because it's a detail that ancient writers could not possibly have known about. You can't see it from the surface. You can only find it with advanced sonar. Yet the story they told points directly to this one-of-a-kind location. The geography itself acts as a massive silent piece of evidence, suggesting that something historic and catastrophic happened right here. A corridor can also be a trap. The linear distribution of the artifacts, the mile-and-a-half-long trail of wheels and bones, follows the path of this submerged bridge. It looks exactly like a group that was caught in the middle of the passage. This location also explains why the artifacts are still there. The 900-foot depth protected them from storms, ship anchors, and looters for millennia. And the unique currents created by the deep canyons on either side have trapped silt and sediment on the plateau. This sediment slowly buried the artifact. And of course, the warm, clear water is perfect for coral growth. The coral has acted like a natural concrete. It grew on the hard, solid surfaces of the chariots, the wood, the bronze, the leather. Over thousands of years, the wood rotted away and the metal corroded, but the coral held its shape. The divers weren't just finding wheels, they were finding wheel-shaped coral. They are essentially fossils of chariots. Without this specific geography and biology, any remnants would have been scattered and dissolved into nothing centuries ago. This land bridge, this perfect crossing, also explains the scale of the find. An entire army with hundreds of chariots, horses, and soldiers forced into this narrow 10-mile bottleneck would be completely and totally vulnerable. When the disaster struck, there was no escape. They couldn't go left. They couldn't go right. They were trapped. This tragic bottleneck explains the massive concentration of artifacts. It's a silent underwater testament to a cataclysmic event. The fact that this terrain is so unique also helps debunk one of the main skeptical arguments. Critics often say, oh, it's just a random shipwreck. But here's the deal. This isn't a shipwreck. It's hundreds of military chariots, all from the same time period, all found in a linear path on the only plausible land crossing in the entire Gulf. That's not a coincidence. That's a scene. This unique path wasn't found by accident. One man claimed it was there all along. The vindication of a madman? This entire incredible story, the secret expedition, the sonar maps, the frozen Egyptologists, it all goes back to one man. A man who was not a professor, not a famous archaeologist, and not part of the academic elite. His name was Ron Wyatt, and for decades, the entire world thought he was a complete crank. So here's the deal with Ron Wyatt. He was a nurse anesthetist from Tennessee. He was also a passionate, deeply religious, self-taught biblical adventurer. Driven by an unshakable, literal belief that the stories in the Bible were physical, locatable history, he spent his life and his own money trying to find the physical proof. He was the definition of an amateur, an outsider, and that's putting it lightly. In the 1970s, Wyatt became obsessed with finding the true Red Sea crossing. He dismissed the traditional Reed Sea theories, small marshy lakes in northern Egypt. He followed the biblical clues, which he believed pointed to a massive body of water deep enough to drown an army. His search led him to the Gulf of Aqaba, and specifically to the massive mountain-locked beach of Nueva. He reasoned with simple logic that if this was the spot where the Israelites were trapped, then this must be the spot where the sea parted. And if that was true, then the remains of Pharaoh's army must be at the bottom of the Gulf, right on that underwater land bridge. So in 1978, armed with basic scuba gear, a small boat, and a lot of faith, he did something no one else had bothered to do. He dived down. What he claimed to find was exactly what the new $10 million expedition just verified. He reported seeing coral-encrusted chariot wheels. He even claimed to have recovered a hub from one. He took blurry, grainy underwater photos, which were easy to dismiss as interestingly shaped coral. But he didn't stop there. On later dives, he claimed to have found more. He reported finding human bones and horse bones, all mixed in with the chariot parts. And he made his most explosive claim of all. He said he had found and filmed the legendary golden chariot wheel gleaming faintly beneath the coral. When Ron Wyatt presented his findings, the academic world didn't just ignore him. They ridiculed him. They tore him apart. He was labeled a fraud, a pseudoscience peddler, and a religious zealot who was just seeing what he wanted to see. Egyptologists and archaeologists were frozen in a state of complete and total dismissal. And get this, Wyatt's other claims made him an even bigger target. He also claimed to have found Noah's Ark, the true location of Mount Sinai in Saudi Arabia right across from Nueva, the ashes of the red heifer, and even, most fantastically, the Ark of the Covenant, hidden in a cave under Jerusalem. To the mainstream scientific community, this wasn't research. It was a fantasy-fueled treasure hunt. His Red Sea claims were thrown out along with everything else. For over 40 years, the site was dismissed as a myth, a conspiracy, and nothing but coral and wishful thinking. But here's the catch. Ron Wyatt passed away in 1999, his claims still almost universally mocked. But he left behind his research. He left his map. He left the exact coordinates of the underwater land bridge and the debris field he had found. The secret high-tech expedition in 2024, they weren't diving blind, they were following Ron Wyatt's map, and their $10 million sonar and high-definition cameras were verifying one by one the impossible claims that the nurse from Tennessee had been making all along. The sonar confirmed the land bridge, the ROVs confirmed the wheels, the 4, 6, and 8-spoked wheels, just as he said. The divers confirmed the bones, and they even saw the glint of gold that Wyatt had reported. This is the core of the controversy. The experts who dismissed Wyatt for decades are now faced with high-tech data that proves he was, at the very least, right about the existence of a massive, ancient underwater debris field. The discovery is forcing a reevaluation of a man everyone had agreed was a fool. And it's forcing a terrifying reevaluation of how this impossible event could have ever happened. Because the how is where the theories get really wild. Chasing a stolen superweapon. This is the big question. If there's an army at the bottom of the sea, how did it get there? The ancient story says the sea parted, the Israelites walked across on dry ground, and the waters then collapsed on the pursuing Egyptian army. Mainstream science says that's impossible, but the evidence is there. So what really happened in the Gulf of Aqaba? This is where the theories get wild. Wild theory. Number one, the volcano tsunami. This is a big one. What if the miracle was actually a perfectly timed natural disaster? Around 3,500 years ago, a massive volcano on the Greek island of Santorini, then called Thera, exploded. This was one of the largest volcanic eruptions in human history. It was a planet-altering event. This mega eruption, hundreds of miles away, would have created a massive tsunami that radiated across the Mediterranean. But what most people don't realize is that tsunamis have a famous, terrifying signature, the drawback. Before the giant wave hits, the sea recedes. The water is pulled back suddenly and dramatically, often for miles, exposing the seabed. To an ancient person who had never seen this, it would look like a miracle. The sea literally parted. So, here's the theory. The Israelites are trapped at Nueva. The Thera eruption causes a massive tidal drawback in the Red Sea. The water pulls back, exposing the 10-mile land bridge. It's a miracle. They run across. The Egyptian army, seeing their path, charges after them onto the exposed, muddy seabed. But here's the catch. The drawback is just the first part. The second part is the wave returning. Just as the Egyptian army, with its heavy, wheel-bogged chariots, reaches the middle of the Gulf, the tsunami hits. A wall of water hundreds of feet high roars back into the Gulf, annihilating the entire army in an instant. It's a scientific explanation that fits the story almost perfectly. The timing, the parting, and the collapse of the walls of water. Wild theory number two, the Ark of the Covenant. This theory is even wilder, and it connects directly back to Ron Wyatt. Remember how Wyatt claimed to find both the chariot wheels and the Ark of the Covenant? What if those two discoveries are linked? What if the Israelites weren't just fleeing with their families? What if they had just stolen Egypt's most powerful secret? A lot of non-mainstream theories propose that the Ark of the Covenant wasn't just a religious box. They say it was a piece of advanced, lost technology, a massive electrical capacitor, an energy source, or even a weapon. So here's the new story. The Israelites, led by Moses, who was raised in the Pharaoh's court and had access to its secrets, steal this powerful device. The Pharaoh is enraged. He's not just chasing to get his slaves back, he's chasing to get his super weapon back. The Israelites are trapped at the sea. The Egyptian army closes in, so Moses uses the device. The Ark of the Covenant unleashes an unknown force, maybe a localized gravity field, maybe a massive energy pulse that pushes the water apart, creating the dry path. The Israelites cross. The Egyptians, blinded by rage, charge in after them. Once they are all in the kill box, Moses, or the ark itself, switches off the device. The walls of water held back by this unknown energy collapse. The army is destroyed. This theory is wild, but it answers a lot of questions. It explains the pillar of fire and cloud, the energy signature of the ark. It explains why Pharaoh would risk his entire elite army, and it explains the supernatural power of the event. Wild theory number three, lost acoustic technology. This one is straight out of science fiction. Some theorists propose that ancient civilizations, maybe even a pre-Egyptian one, understood the power of sound and frequency. What if the parting of the sea wasn't a miracle or a volcano, but a technological event? What if the staff of Moses was some kind of tonal resonator, a piece of lost tech that, when activated, created a specific sound frequency? A frequency so powerful it could literally push water, creating a parting through acoustic levitation. This sonic weapon would have held the water back only to be deactivated once the army was inside. Whether it was a volcano, a superweapon, or lost technology, all these theories point to the same conclusion. Something happened in that Gulf. Something powerful enough to wipe an army off the face of the earth, leaving its remains to be fossilized in coral, waiting to be found. But if the proof is there, why the silence? What are they hiding? This brings us to the core of the title, the very heart of this entire mystery. Why are Egyptologists and mainstream archaeologists frozen? It's not from awe, it's not from excitement. It's from a combination of pure academic disbelief, professional self-preservation, and perhaps a genuine, terrifying fear of what this discovery actually means for the world. So, here's the deal. For over 100 years, the consensus among almost all secular Egyptologists is that the Exodus, as described in the Bible, did not happen. Period. At least not on the impossible scale the story claimed. They teach this in every university, from Cairo to Harvard. It's written in every textbook. It is the dogma. They argue very logically that there is zero archaeological evidence in the Sinai Desert for 2 million people, a population the size of a modern city wandering for 40 years. They demand, where are the campsites? Where are the mass graves? Where's the pottery? They argue correctly that there is no mention in any Egyptian hieroglyph, no record on any papyrus of their entire army, their most valuable military asset, their charioteers being destroyed in a single catastrophic day. The entire foundation of modern Egyptology, its timelines, its king lists, its understanding of the 18th dynasty's power, its history, it's all built on a framework that does not include this event. It's a framework that cannot include this event. To them, it's a myth. A powerful story of cultural foundation, but a myth nonetheless. Now, suddenly, a team of divers following the map of a man, Ron Wyatt, who everyone in the serious academic world dismissed as a crank, a charlatan, a religious dreamer, they find a massive underwater debris field. A field that doesn't just hint at the story, it matches it perfectly. We're not talking about one or two broken pots. We're talking about hundreds of chariots. We're talking about wheels, axles, and cabinets scattered across the seafloor. And not just any chariot. The specific 6-spoke and 8-spoke designs used only by the Egyptian army of the 18th dynasty. The exact right time period. At the exact right location, a massive natural land bridge cutting across the deep Gulf, with the exact kind of geography the story implies. If this site is real, then the experts were wrong, and that's putting it lightly. This discovery doesn't just add a new chapter to history, it tears out all the old ones. It would mean that the ancient texts were not just stories, but accurate, literal, historical accounts. A tenured professor who has built their entire 30-year career, their entire reputation, on the Exodus as myth theory cannot suddenly turn around and say, oops, guess that nerd from Tennessee was right all along. Their career would be over. Their life's work would be meaningless. Every book they published would be fiction. Every student they mentored would have been taught a lie. So they are frozen. They are silent. The safest thing to do is to ignore it, to attack the source, to call it unverified, pseudoscience, or misinterpreted. They will argue it's just a shipwreck graveyard from many different eras, even though the evidence points to a single massive chaotic event. They will say the coral-encrusted wheels are just coral formations or modern debris, even when the shapes are unmistakable. They will demand impossible standards of proof for this one site while accepting far less for their own pet theories. They are gatekeepers, and this discovery is a battering ram at their gates. They will never ever give an inch because giving an inch means their entire ivory tower comes crumbling down. But the wild theory here is that it goes deeper. What if it goes deeper than just a few dozen academic careers? What if this is a global conspiracy? Think about it. Really, think. If this site is proven beyond any doubt to be the remains of the Pharaoh's army, it would be seen as physical, tangible, scientific proof of one of the foundational miracles of the Old Testament. In a world full of religious and political tension, what would that do? It would elevate one set of religious beliefs backed by physical proof above all others. It would validate the claims of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam in one fell swoop. That's not just academically disruptive, that's geopolitically disruptive. It's an earthquake. What about other world religions? What about purely secular atheistic governments who have built their entire state on the idea that religion is a fantasy? Do you think those powers want billions of people to suddenly have physical proof of God's direct intervention in history? It's a geopolitical time bomb. It threatens the balance of global power. And what do powerful people do when they are threatened by an inconvenient truth? They don't debate it. They bury it. They make the problem disappear. This is where the story gets its most urgent. This is where it gets chilling. The evidence is vanishing. Let's talk about that golden chariot wheel that Ron Wyatt claimed he found. He said it was a four-spoke wheel, the kind used only by the highest royalty, maybe the pharaoh himself. He claimed he brought it to the surface, documented it, and that its existence was reported to the Egyptian authorities, thinking they would be ecstatic. And then, poof, it vanished. There are no official photos. There is no museum record, no official statement. The one piece of smoking gun proof that could have verified the entire story is gone. Skeptics, the same frozen experts, laugh and say, see, he made it all up. It never existed. But what if he didn't? What if it was confiscated? What if it was taken and buried in a deep, dark vault, a place like the warehouse at the end of Indiana Jones? A secret so explosive it can never be allowed to see the light of day? It gets worse, much worse. The new 2024 expedition, comparing their new high-tech, high-resolution sonar maps to Wyatt's original maps and photos from the 70s and 80s, has reported something deeply disturbing. Large sections of the debris field, they seem to have been altered, cleared. Areas that Wyatt claimed were dense with artifacts, places he labeled chariot parts and skeletal remains, are now suspiciously barren. Is this just natural erosion? Is it just the currents of the Red Sea which have been flowing for 3,500 years? Or is it a cleanup operation? The new team has reported seeing drag marks on the seafloor. Marks that look like massive objects were hooked and pulled away. This isn't nature. This is surgical. Is it possible that in the 40 years since Wyatt first found it, someone has been slowly, quietly, and systematically removing the evidence, erasing the history from the bottom of the sea? We are in a race against time. The site is incredibly fragile. The coral fossils, the human and horse remains encased in mineral deposits, are being eroded by currents. But the human element, that is the real threat. The experts are frozen because they are standing on the edge of a cliff. Behind them is their entire life's work, their reputation, their comfortable, established world. In front of them is a dark, deep gulf full of impossible evidence, evidence that threatens to pull them and all of established history under. And while they stand there, silent and paralyzed, the shadows are moving. The evidence is disappearing. The truth isn't just being ignored, it's being actively and methodically destroyed. So is this the world's greatest archaeological find or a massive 40-year-old hoax? And if it's real, who is so desperate to erase it? Let us know what you think in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe.
Okay, so I played that whole thing for you because it relates directly to what we've been talking about before. Um, I just wanted to pick up on a couple of things there, but I want to tie it to where the rest of this series is going as well. He talks about these wild theories, and something we talked about here as well is that my own view that Satan has hijacked the scientific method, right? And so they will tell you that supernatural doesn't exist. If you can't see it, we can't prove it. It didn't happen, kind of a thing. But in order to do that, they have to offer their own theory. And so this is just some more examples. We actually talked about this first one. There's a guy who claimed that the pillar of fire and the pillar of cloud were actually from a volcanic eruption. Um, but just some problems with some of these theories, but wasn't already obvious. If you know anything about the tsunami thing, it doesn't produce the wall of water that the Bible talks about. The drawback does not produce this wall of water that the Bible talks about, and it would not have lasted long enough for everybody to go across. Typically, this drawback might last a few minutes, half an hour perhaps, something like that. But for 2 million people to walk 11 miles, probably took, I'm going to guess, 3 to 4 hours at least. They were in a hurry, by the way. So I don't think it would have lasted long enough. And the Ark of the Covenant one seems obvious to me because the Ark wasn't even constructed until after they crossed the Red Sea, went to Mount Sinai, and got the law, right? So that wasn't even around. But if it was some super duper technology that got stolen, why didn't it survive? You'd think folks today would like to have that, whatever that was. Um, and then the lost acoustic technology is, in fact, science fiction. That not to say it couldn't be invented, but it's not around yet, and they're saying it was invented and lost, and so on and so forth. It seems to me a pretty desperate attempt to come up with something that says God didn't do it, right? They want to deny the supernatural at all. I mean, the use of something like this acoustic technology in Moses' staff sounds pretty supernatural to me, right? There was some technology in Moses' staff. It was in Moses as well, and that was the Almighty God who did that, right? So this is just another example of the kinds of things that the scientific world comes up with, and I don't want to be just in the business of throwing stones all the time, but want to make particularly young people understand that this is the world you're graduating from high school and going into, right? Is that they're making all these kinds of arguments to try to convince you that your Bible is false. Okay, the Bible's not false. But I wanted to focus on the latter part of this thing where he talks about some of these cover-ups, if you will, right? If you remember, we talked about this in the Ron Wyatt stuff. Um, one of the things that led him to this particular location was an old map that he found that described this beach. It's highlighted in yellow there. It's an old map. Um, and the name of it was Nueva al Muzayana, whatever that is. The country boys English ain't great. His Arabic is even worse. All right, but if you translate that phrase, it translates to waters of Moses' opening. Okay, so that's one of the things that focused him on that beach. When he got there, this is Ron Wyatt talking. It says, 1978, when I first visited the beach area with my two sons, we found a Phoenician-style column lying on the southern end of the beach. Partially in the water, the inscriptions had been eroded away, or possibly they were purposefully chiseled away. We found this during the time that Israel was occupying the Sinai, and we pointed out to the soldiers who were patrolling the beach. The next time we returned, we found they had moved it across the road and set it up in concrete. So the Israelites picked it up, moved it, and made a permanent monument out of it, which is still there today. This guy is a guy named Kevin Fisher, who was one of Ron Wyatt's assistants. And Ron Wyatt's organization, the Ark Discovery International, is still around, and he's with them, and he gives these interviews on some of this stuff from time to time. But you might remember that later, it was in 1984, Ron took two of his two sons and snuck into Saudi Arabia looking for the route of the Exodus on the other side of Gulf of Aqaba and Mount Sinai, and he got arrested, thrown in jail for 70 days, right? He and his sons. And this is his account there. So we didn't fully understand the importance of this column until a few years later. We did recognize it was definitely not of Egyptian style. But in 1984, when we were imprisoned in Saudi Arabia, our captors, in an effort to verify our story that we believed Mount Sinai was there and that Musa, or Moses, led the people across the sea to their country, had me take them to the beach where they arrived after passing through the sea. I directed them to the spot in a helicopter. Landing there, I found another column identical to the one on the opposite shore, except this one had inscriptions intact. Noting carefully the Phoenician archaic Hebrew, which we talked about these various languages in previous lessons, he says, we were later able to have it translated. It contained the words Mizraim, which is Egypt, Solomon, Edom, Death, Pharaoh, Moses, and Yahweh. From this, we knew that King Solomon had erected these columns in honor of Yahweh and dedicated them to the miracle of the crossing of the Red Sea. So Solomon himself marked where this had happened, right? According to Mr. Wyatt. And that's what these columns were for. He says, and that column possibly saved my sons and my lives. It proved what I had been telling my Saudi jailers. This year, we discovered that the Saudis have removed the column on their beach from its original location. They've sunk a large marker in concrete where it was located, and we're trying to locate it in the antiquities files. But we have documented the solitary marker sunk into the ground in concrete on the beach just down from the remains of the ancient fortress we believe was Baal Zephon. So evidence here that the Saudi government didn't like what they found, right? And they took it away. And as of my last look at this stuff from Ark Discovery, they've not found any record of this column in the Saudis' antiquities department, right? There's no record of it. They don't want to. They don't want to acknowledge anything that legitimizes the nation of Israel, basically, right? So this is where it is today, right? Just a marker there. They took the column away. This is written by Nell Wyatt, who is Ron's wife. You might remember he passed away in 1999. She's still associated with the Ark Discovery Organization. She says, we can only marvel at how the Lord has preserved these sites throughout history. If the true location had been known all along, there would be no evidence left. We live in a time when people simply don't believe the Red Sea crossing ever really happened, and God tells us that he knew that time would come. Quoting Jeremiah, it says, therefore, behold, the days come, saith the Lord, that it shall no more be said that the Lord liveth, that brought up the children of Israel out of the land of Egypt. And indeed, that's going on today across all of secular science and archaeology. She says, but he does live, and before it's all over with, he will vindicate his word to the world. So, one of the things I want to try to get to towards the end of this series here, Ron Wyatt also talked about this thing he called the Egyptian Watergate. So basically the cover-up of this event in Egypt. Remember in the film, they talked about how there was no Egyptian record of the destruction of their army ever. And therefore they say it didn't exist. I'm going, really? So you're telling me that the records that are kept by the government are more reliable than the scriptures? Okay, let's talk about that one, right? And we talked about this during that discussion with Ron, that the kings basically, when they record all of their exploits, they brag about all the good stuff that they did. Okay, somehow they don't talk about the bad stuff. It's just not there. And I would say that that's not uncommon even today. Oh, by the way, we're going to talk about that. If you remember, this guy Sennacherib was striking all of Judah, right? And he wanted Jerusalem. He didn't get it. Remember, God God slew 180,000 of his army in one night, and he had to retreat, right? But the record that he said that he left says, and for him, Hezekiah, I shut him like a caged bird in his royal city of Jerusalem. He did. He besieged Jerusalem, and God destroyed his army, and he had to leave. Okay, if he had actually taken Jerusalem, he would have said so in his record. The records of the bad stuff are usually written down by the enemy of the guy who's talking. You know what I'm saying? And so that happened time and time again throughout history. It happens today. So this is Mr. Wyatt's explanation of the thing. He goes, soon after the Red Sea crossing, the word arrives at the palace in Memphis that it was too fantastic to believe. I'm just going to paraphrase this and for the sake of time. The word gets back that the entire army, the entire priesthood, all of the government officials, everybody of any consequence in the nation of Egypt was dead. They'd all drowned in the Red Sea. And they recognized this has to be kept secret because they were the world superpower at the time. And all the countries round about them were vassal countries paying them tribute and all that kind of stuff. And if they didn't have an army, they weren't going to get paid anymore, and they'd probably get taken over. So the queen, known as the true royal wife, was the only one who was authorized to set a new pharaoh. Okay, and so she had to figure out what to do, right? There was no one in the country at that time who was qualified to become pharaoh. So she did the only thing she knew to do. She wrote a letter to the Hittite king, another kingdom, and she said this: my husband is dead and I have no son. People say that you have many sons. If you send me one of your sons, he will become my husband, for it is repugnant for me to take one of my servants to husband. Which testifies there was nobody in the nation of Egypt at that point who was qualified to become her husband and to give her a child to take the throne. Okay, so she was looking for somebody else. Remember that story? um, The king didn't believe her. He sent somebody to verify it. This guy disappears, right? And so at the end of the day, um, this guy Akhenaten was the guy who actually took the throne, who was not typically in line. We studied all that before, but what the Egyptian records show is that Amenhotep III succeeded. That was when he died, was succeeded by this guy Akhenaten. It doesn't tell you that Amenhotep III died in the Red Sea, right? And why it didn't follow the normal lineage. We went through that before, but I just wanted to, for the sake of a kind of a translation into the rest of this series, not at all uncommon for the governments to mess with the facts, right? When they're writing the history. Throughout history, governments around the world have gone to extraordinary lengths to hide uncomfortable truths from their citizens. These secrets often stay buried for years, sometimes decades before coming to light. There are many in this country. We can make a very, very long list around the world. Just some examples. This is Project MK Ultra. CIA did from 1953 and 1973, where they gave all these drugs, hallucinatory drugs and stuff like that, to people unwittingly to study their reaction, right? And it was a big deal, bad deal, and that was exposed in 1975. Some of us might remember Watergate, right? Where these actually Republican operatives connected to Nixon's reelection broke into the Democratic National Convention headquarters. All covered up for a long time until it finally came to light. Nixon had to resign. So the thalidomide tragedy is a drug that was given to pregnant women back in the 50s for morning sickness. Turned out it caused terrible birth defects, and they denied it forever, right? Until they finally were proven and brought to justice. And what's going on right now, Senator Rand Paul is going to release this book on the deception that we were fed during the COVID pandemic, right? So many, many examples. But what I wanted to get to, a couple of things. One is Ron Wyatt was almost universally ridiculed because he had no credentials. And I tend to think of him as a guy that, not unlike Brother Branham, right? Just a country boy, no real credentials in his field, but a very, very strong faith in the word, right? And I think God can use people like that, whether they belong to the message or not, right? God can use those kinds of people. And so why is this stuff coming to light now? I think we need it now because Satan is trying to tell you science is the religion, right? And science can prove your Bible is wrong. And we're called upon to give an answer to things like that. So that's kind of the purpose of this series. I'm going to back up also next week. You heard him talk about in this film Wyatt's claim of having found the Ark of the Covenant. I specifically left that out of the series I did here simply because he purposely did not bring physical evidence forward for that, and there was a reason for that. And so the purpose of this series was to talk about patterns of evidence. I was going to show you actual physical evidence. He didn't present any for that. But because they brought it up, and because it does kind of tie into some of the end time stuff we're seeing right now, I thought I'd go back and pick that up. So for the next week or so, I'll bring that one to you. It's his claim to have found the Ark of the Covenant. That's all we have for today. Let's close with prayer. Lord Jesus, once again, we do thank you for the accuracy of your word. We thank you for the fact that we can count upon it as being the only true source of absolute truth. And we pray, Lord, that you would keep us ever mindful and sensitive to it, that we might apply it to our daily walk, that we might understand how we can best serve you. We'd ask once again as you bless the bread of life that's broken to us from the pulpit, that we would come away better equipped to serve you. Pray, ask it in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ. Amen.